So earlier in your career, you were a 15-year Microsoft veteran. Okay, I've interviewed many Microsoft leaders, CTOs, architects, and people on my podcast before, but tell me a little bit about that journey. Give me the 15 years condensed into a couple of minutes.
So I was very lucky. In my Microsoft career, I joined very junior. I joined, Microsoft people will know, level 58, way down in the weeds, and I left as kind of a senior director, which was pretty cool. So I did about 30 years worth of Microsoft career progression in a 15-year period. I was very fortunate. It took the right moves at the right time when things were done. So I did get an interesting chance to see different parts of Microsoft, from services, the enterprise group, the product teams. I got to see a lot of interesting sides of Microsoft. So first is you have to take your hats off to that company. Everything I left in 2014. And I left Microsoft to their, in the data center, their arch rival at the time, VMware, right? So they walked me out the building quite unceremoniously. But the cool thing about that is of the RevSum divisions, in other words, of the biggest businesses and lines of business that Microsoft had in 2014, not even 2 of the top 10 exist in 2024.
Oh, wow.
So just think about that. Imagine if you could go today to any business and say, right, 80% of everything you do now will not be here in 10 years from now. You won't care. All of the KPIs you currently manage will no longer be the same KPIs. All of the products right now that you're being told to hit will actually not exist anymore, and will issue this remarkable, complete transformation incrementally year by year. And nobody will notice a thing, and will still continue to be amongst the most valuable company in the world. If you just think about that.
That's scary.
Scary. It requires huge amount of mental elasticity. The Microsoft ride is just one that, if you could ever get in through their entry process, is just one that I would recommend for almost any career perspective, because it just takes you into the big leagues and teaches you some just incredible lessons. The most of which is, on this annual period, the company reinvents itself. And so it's not that it's lack of attention to detail, but it will never fall off a cliff because it wasn't paying attention about what's next. And that's the most bit that I loved about that. So my funnest years at Microsoft were in the incubation division, which at the time was an initiative for Microsoft to invent its next billion-dollar businesses. So you had the big Windows and Office and these gigantic mega divisions, which right now are no longer as powerful as they used to be. And then you had these new divisions and new businesses that Microsoft wanted to get into at the time, cloud, all this other stuff. Did one of the first Azure deal in the UK, did the first Office 365 deal in the UK. I did a whole bunch of these things that were just completely off the wall compared to a company that just used to sell licenses.
Sure.
So the cool part about that for me is that it educated me on how to be an entrepreneur, because that was the incubation business division. We were an entrepreneurial division building the brand new businesses of Microsoft, but backed by an 800-pound gorilla. So I always say that I wasn't a first-time founder the first time I built a business on my own, because I'd been doing it at Microsoft for 6 or 7 years. The incubation business division, where I was part of for so many years, was that entrepreneurial business division that launched or embedded acquisitions into the enterprise sales model and just reimagined Microsoft. So I don't think I would have been as successful as an entrepreneur if it wasn't for working in that team, whose exact special forces mandate was we are an elite team building what's next in 5 years' time. And right now, the big green army does not appreciate us.
Sure.
I almost got in trouble the first time I did my first big cloud deal because it killed a licensing deal. And the licensing deal was 25 million quid. And it was replaced with a £2 million a year deal over 3 years. So the enterprise lead at the time said, you just took a 25 million quid deal and you turned it into 6. Yeah. But then it was a lighthouse win that Microsoft could build the rest of its cloud PR around.
Yeah.
So some people were very upset with our team. Other people saw us as the future. And that was a really interesting experience that I would say kind of a notes from the field that you wouldn't be expecting from the brand. But it was was a very interesting experience, and I loved literally every day I was at Microsoft.
I think the entire time you were there, Steve Ballmer?
No. Bill Gates was CEO when I joined. Okay. I won an award from Microsoft. It was like a perfect evaluation grade, and then they flew me to Seattle and got on stage and they paraded you for a bit, and then I had a lunch with Bill and Steve.
Oh wow!
And Steve was COO at the time. Bill was the CEO. But I just by luck would have it, I sat next to Bill Gates when that event, and I actually got to spend like half an hour with him listening. And he said to me, "You're going to leave Microsoft one day because you're too entrepreneurial. So let me tell you 2 or 3 things that you're probably going to want to know."
Okay.
Which I thought were really interesting.
So that I can't leave it on that cliffhanger. So what if you had to pick one thing that Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer taught you, what would one thing be? Manage
the detail. Every single great entrepreneurial journey thinks that the idea is good enough and that just, I've had this idea. The idea isn't good enough. The execution is strategic. That's the part that Bill used to always believe. He would love an idea directionally, but he would back a better plan of a poor idea before he would back a great idea with a poor plan.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So actually,
like perfect and not happening is it's not existing, but good or great and it happens is better than perfect because it actually gets out there and makes it happen.
Yeah. So he sent a book to all of us that time, that one called The Adherence Principle.
Okay.
And basically, I'll summarize the entire book, which was also the concept behind his lecture that day to the high performing tier of people at Microsoft, and that was that a poor idea executed flawlessly will outperform a flawless idea executed poorly.
Yeah.
And on a math perspective, doesn't stand to reason. 4 times 3 should be the same as 3 times 4. And what Bill said was that's not true. Execution, high definition execution of an average quality idea will always win. So if you have an idea, great, fine. Focus your detail on how you're going to make that idea work and live. Focus on the KPIs, focus on the specific things that lead you to believe that idea is good. Be willing to pivot from it if you need to. But the advice that we had on that day was pivot less. You've got this new school of entrepreneurs sometimes that comes across. It says, well, listen to the market and listen to the feedback and listen to everybody and change your idea 10 times if you have to. Well, actually, that's not following the adherence principle. That's not following an idea through to its logical thing. And the picture that he drew on the presentation that he gave us was a guy underneath in a tunnel looking for diamonds and giving up. And you could see that the guy was like, giving up, and then it was a sideways cutout. You could see that the diamonds and the treasure was about half a thing away that he just not cut through. The point I think that we're trying to make was that executing something to a high degree of conviction. Yeah. So if your idea is worth backing, if your idea has got some angel investors, if your idea has got some people already that you've convinced to join your journey, it's worth pursuing that idea to a great degree of integrity and conviction before you just quickly pivot and that your business that was supposed to sell widgets now turned into a consulting service that identifies whether widgets should be sold. Yeah. That's a complete pivot. Yeah. And maybe the adherence principle says just stick through that idea until really it is painfully obvious that it's wrong. Mm-hmm. Because what he noticed is our business groups at Microsoft at the time needed 3, 4, 5 years of solid conviction windows to drive through something new. And I thought that was a lesson. The other 2 were secret.
Okay, no problem. So after Bill and Steve, you didn't work under Satya?
No, Satya was taking over within a month or 2 of me leaving. And I always make fun of my Microsoft long-term things that it wasn't Satya, it was my departure. Because literally when I left Microsoft, it was at $25 a share and it's sitting at 427 and it's had a stock split. I'm like, guys, it's my departure that actually did it. The moment I left, things turned up for you guys massively. You all each owe me a 5% contribution, but sadly no one has bit that theory.
Well, as somebody that spent 15 years with the business, what are your thoughts on Satya?
he was the leader that the company needed at the time. And Microsoft had, from Bill and especially Steve, continued with high fidelity the original, again, say the word conviction and business models and strategies that that Microsoft had. I think it would typify, if you look at Steve Ballmer's era, talking about this concept that they had of 3 screens and a cloud. So what they said is there's 3 screens that you need to have: a mobile screen, some type of desktop PC screen, and maybe some type of tablet device. And that was like chasing the past. And we're going to own these 3 screens, and we're going to own a cloud that connects them. And that kind of conviction, and that, behind Windows Phone, behind all of these individual things. And what that betrayed was this over-focus still on trying to be a consumer company and a consumer at the individual productivity level. What Satya realized, what to anybody became obvious, is Satya realized that Microsoft is actually an enterprise company. Mm-hmm. Microsoft is probably the best enterprise company in the world.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And it knows how to keep millions of things that are mission critical running. And Satya came out of this, what was at the time called Server and Tools Business Group, which was the unsexy bit. It's server, and it doesn't sound even cool. It's like server tools, doesn't sound nice. And he was the divisional president of that. And nobody who was a diehard Microsoft. We track everything, like the micro news. We track all of the secret insider stuff. Nobody saw Satya coming. Not a single person. And what the principal thing was, he said, is we're going to embrace the enemies that used to be our enemies in consumer. So we'll embrace Linux. We'll embrace open source software. And I mean, not just pay it marketing lip service. We will literally embrace it. We will start doing new things like Git and GitHub rather than trying to protect the Visual Studio Team System business. We're going to go off onto a multi-dimensional cloud that is first and best for other people. Like look at Microsoft and VMware now. They get along like a house on fire in data center virtualization. Yeah. So you look at all of the previous holy grails that had been built for 20 to 25 years. And it is irrefutable that Satya burnt them all down. And if you remember, a company doesn't exist. A company is not its own thing. A company is a collection of leaders and islands of politics, right? So you have these presidents of the business divisions that could make a decision that says, well, I'm the president of Windows, and here's what Windows stands for. And effectively it behaves like it's a totally separate division of, then server and tool, then it behaves it was a different division of, at the time, cloud was a separate thing, and it was different to the field sales organization. And you had these product leads, these product presidents that had their own effective software companies underneath them. That was difficult to herd them as cats. What Satya basically says, if you're not on the Microsoft strategy, you're fired. And he didn't mind making examples of anybody. So what happened is his leadership fell into line. And that's something, if you're honest, lots of people love slagging off Steve Ballmer. He was a great, great, great leader. What he did have against him, though, was basically a whole bunch of the presidents of the individual business units underneath it not following a plan. Okay. But he did have the loyalty of the Microsoft field sales organization. If you look at the average Microsoft account exec, we looked forward more to Steve Ballmer talking than we did Bill Gates. Bill Gates was some kind of
high energy. I love watching Steve on stage.
Yeah, he was like, so Bill was like, very methodical. It was like you're watching some TED talk from some incredible super savant. When Steve came on stage, it was a religious experience. It was like a thing that like, this is the heart and soul of who and what we are.
It's Tony Robbins right there. Yeah,
exactly. It's exactly right. So I think not anybody really, whilst you had people in leadership and senior leadership start making like corps and stuff, because it was largely about the share price, Steve had an incredibly difficult time. And I think there was a lot more buy-in and mandate about the transformation that was needed for Microsoft. Around the transition from Ballmer to Satya. I think what Satya got was buy-in that he could break all of the holy grails. I think it's an unfair analysis to Steve to say that he was allowed to run Microsoft the way that he wanted to run Microsoft. At the board level, there was still too much stuff. There was still too much alternate views. There was a burning platform created by Ballmer's departure that Microsoft did a complete reboot. So anyway, that's my very low level assessment from way down there on the lines, looking up at what they were doing up in the ivory tower.